0. Yeah, you like that? Are we good? Do you think we're good? Okay, cool. So, hey, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Sustainiacs. I'm Michael Vincent. I'm just trying to figure out how to press record at the right times. And she's Emma Whiteman. And she met the third person here at a wedding right after Hurricane Ian. Emma, introduce our guest and yourself, please.
Yeah, I mean, you know me, Emma Whiteman, but we are here today with Shelby Thomas of the Ocean Rescue Alliance. I'm so excited about this. This is something that like I said, we were at a wedding. My friends kind of knew Shelby and all this cool work that she's been doing and really becoming very prevalent in South Florida. So Shelby, welcome to the show. And we're so excited to have you.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great stuff, Shelby. So she sent me your information, and I as I always do, I stalk people on LinkedIn and stuff to try and find out a little bit about what's going on. You live down in Florida. You grew up down in Florida, I believe. I mean, your schooling and stuff like that is all Florida. UF, and was it all UF?
All the way. Gator,
UF,
yeah.
Yeah, it was UF all the way. Okay. Yeah, my daughter's in Orlando.
UCF.
Central, UCF. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a night. She loves it down there. But yeah, great stuff. And then I saw you interviewed about the mermaids and all other kind of stuff. But we'll get into we'll get into all of that stuff there. My first question is: give us the elevator pitch on Ocean Rescue Alliance, and how hard was it for you to not have that spell OR instead of ORA? Because I would have been killing myself to have somehow it be OAR. But that's just me. I'm weird like
that. Yeah, I can get into the reasoning for the name for sure. But so essentially what we are, the Ocean Rescue Alliance, is a marine conservation and restoration nonprofit organization, and we implement innovative techniques to scale marine restoration. And we primarily focus on designing artificial infrastructure to strategically help address biological issues and be able to provide coastal protection, enhance marine habitat, aid in scaling restoration, and also connecting communities together through art. And so we have different sectors of structures that we design for these different purposes that I just mentioned. And we really aim to help also address that more psychological side of connecting people and shifting public relationships back to a personal connection to the ocean and marine resources.
Yeah, that is very succinct and excellent and well practiced pitch. I love it. So when you talk about structures and stuff like that, what are we talking about? Let's break this down for.
Yeah, we'll give it more of a verbiage visual, right?
I heard structures underground and stuff, or underwater and so on and so forth. And you see people sinking ships and stuff like that to create reefs and stuff like that.
I can give that explanation. So traditionally artificial reefs throughout Florida and really the world have really been trash of land. So construction pilings, boulders, culverts, different debris or ships. And in reality, that mimics nothing like a natural system, right?
I wouldn't think
so. Essentially, we're treating our ocean as a trash can. And it's out of sight, out of mind.
And justifying.
And although some of those can be really, unique and fun dive sites. I love diving ships. It's fun to do, but they're not the most sustainable, not the best materials that are eco-friendly. And so what we do that's really unique and different than any other artificial reef company is actually design reefs to mimic natural reef geology. So we're able to take the latest and greatest technology and 3D scan and use LiDAR scanning to mimic what a real reef looks like and replicate that artificially. And then we can actually outplant biological species. So we'll aim to design the site based off of the needs of that area. So we can do coral, oyster, and mangrove restoration. What I call it is we combine gray and green infrastructure. We provide that fundamental base that creates fish habitat and can help aid in creating fisheries niches that are more mimicking natural reef geology, and then actually outplant live species on top of it to make it more of a thriving ecosystem. And we can scale this around the world. And in certain areas, we wouldn't need to do biological restoration. For example, the structures that I mentioned that are designed for reducing wave energy to protect against coastal erosion, we could bring those all the way up to New York and provide a more sustainable solution than current coastal protection measures. And I can kind of briefly explain that. Really, all over the globe, coastal communities currently dredge sand offshore and dump it on the beach line to maintain it. And really what that is a band-aid. It's a quick fix to the long-term problem of erosion and climate crisis. And we have inherently more coastal communities becoming at risk. And this is a multi-billion dollar industry of just dumping sand. And those have immense impacts.
Okay, so when you talk about that, I get all the what you're saying there. It's just a Band-Aid. I get that. But it's a way to kick the can down the road till we figure out something better. Maybe you've done that. But when you say it's $1 billion industry, is it $1 billion cost or an industry that is making billions of dollars and you're disrupting it?
Both. So it's
okay.
$1 billion cost, but the revenues from that expense that's justified is ecotourism and protecting coastal infrastructure. So
Gotcha.
having a city, that's on the coastline, that's a valuable asset. And for example, in Florida, we rely on tourism and beach tourism. So keeping that beach there is a high priority, no matter what the cost is environmentally. And so we get into this perpetual cycle of this Band-Aid quick fix because we need the beach there, but they're not wanting to, invest into larger structures. And we have advanced a lot more. So some of these applications and designs were not around 10 years ago. And so what we have designed is actually just like a natural reef does. It actually protects against coastal erosion. It protects, we have one of the third largest reefs here in Florida in the world. And it's a natural barrier.
Really? That's the third largest one. And where is that? Is that off the East Coast?
Yes. So from West Palm Beach all the way down to the Florida Keys.
Well, I don't know that many people knew that. Did you know that, Emma?
I mean, I did, but I did my master's research.
Well, yeah, but you did your master's research there, though. Yeah.
That would be the only reason I would know. I mean, as a layman, you might know that there are reefs down there, but
people know about the Florida Keys,
reef,
right?
You think of Australia, you think of like Indonesia or the Caribbean. You don't necessarily think of Florida, but it really is in our backyard.
Yeah, I think of some in the Caribbean and like I guess it's Hamburger Reef over in the Caymans, which is cool, and some other dive sites that are there, and then a Great Barrier Reef. But I never knew that like the third largest one was right Florida. There in our backyard.
Yeah, we actually have reefs not only in South Florida. There's actually reefs all over the world that are deeper sea reefs. People don't realize that. So it's not just tropical regions that have reefs, but the ones that are relative to coastal protection and biodiversity and really fish nurseries are those near shore subtropical reefs.
Okay, so just to put all this in perspective and kind of structure it from my own weak mind, is there? As I've got three things so far. So you're creating these infrastructures, reefs, et cetera, underwater to produce natural fish habitats, fisheries, I guess, right, to attract species of fish and help grow them, sustain them. Is that right?
Yes.
And then also to plant or place like plant life, biological life, plant life on those to help restore that and grow those, right? Like coral, live coral, that type of stuff, right?
Not necessarily plants, but yeah. So animals, oysters, coral.
Okay,
plants, but we mainly do corals in South Florida.
Gotcha.
Sometimes it's a domino effect, Michael. Like if you outplant coral reefs, then the environment kind of starts to recover in a certain way, right, Shelby? Or am I wrong?
So I'll tell you the value here of doing nursery bases with artificial reefs gives us the capacity to now put reefs in areas that might be better suited for growing corals. They may be in areas that are better growing conditions, absent of disease. We can expand the range when we're having climate threats and species aren't able to adapt fast enough. We can now look at target areas where they can survive in the meantime and we can safeguard species. So that's really the great unique side of using artificial reefs strategically is we can create habitat connectivity where we're bridging together habitat that are not reaching. And we're having those issues in the Florida Keys right now, where there's been a large die off of corals and some of the adults cannot actually reach each other in terms of sexual reproduction. They release gametes into the water and really rely on fertilization for them to then settle out and grow. So there's different biological constraints that we're facing due to a lot of different climate stressors and anthropogenics, just human caused issues essentially. And so we're able to be really adaptive by using artificial structure to meet some of these problems and create solutions.
Okay, cool. So, and that is, I mean, there's so much to dive into just right there, right? Do you have to build the structures first before you do the coral, or bring the animal life before you bring in the corals? Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
you have to put the structure out before you put anything on it. So what we do is build it on land. We use a pH neutral, environmentally friendly concrete mix that we've researched with various universities, and we then construct that reef, deploy it with a barge into the ocean, and after that, we're able to outplant species really right after. But you can outplant years after the fact as well. You could also not outplant different corals or oysters. We don't have to put anything on them. They create habitat regardless. They can create coastal protection regardless. But we bring in that added value of being able to do restoration and habitat enhancement by outplanting species.
So how do you do that? Do you lift them from other locations, healthy locations, and
So
transplant them there, or do you grow them yourself? I was in the Atlantic Aquarium, and if you've never been there, it's really cool, the behind the
yeah,
scenes
they're
stuff. They actually have a
big
coral
aquarium.
nursery. They have a coral nursery there, I guess you call it. I guess you would call it, where they're growing and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which was kind of cool. Is that how you
So
do that, and then take those, or
we
what?
don't have our own coral nursery. What we do is actually work with what we call coral practitioners that are already growing corals at high rates. And actually, they have many corals, they don't have enough people to get them out. And
Oh,
that's part
really?
of where we come in designing different strategies to outplant at scale. And we're able to do that with artificial structure. So we work with all the Florida restoration groups that have coral nurseries. They provide the corals, and then we're able to outplant with them both on natural reefs as well as artificial.
Wow. Okay. We're so far down it. Can we back up just a little bit and get a little bit of your history? I know you went to UF. You got your, you're getting your PhD right now, right? You're a PhD candidate
Yes.
right now. Is that right?
Yeah.
So let's go out. When did you decide, hey, this is what I'm going to do? I need to be involved in this. Were you like surfing on the East Coast of Florida and diving and stuff, and noticed that things weren't so great, and you were going to make this your mission? How did that occur?
So I grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida, did grow up surfing, grew up around the water, loving water activities, am a diver. And initially going into undergrad, I actually had a totally different focus. I was doing pharmaceutical research with corals. So more of the approach of using secondary metabolites, defense chemicals, essentially from marine organisms like corals and sea squirts, and using them for basically treating anti-cancer properties. We looked for anti-cancer properties within these secondary metabolites that you could treat cancer and various other illnesses. And some of the most powerful medicine that we use today, like Taxol, which is what we treat breast cancer and colon cancer with, is driven from the bark of the yew tree and typically terrestrial plants. So if you can imagine just for how evolved and really diverse the marine ecosystem is, we don't even know what we're risking, right? And these corals are dying, and they exhibit 100 times the potency of what we use for current medicine. So I got really interested in, exploring. I guess the ocean's always intrigued me in terms of mystery. We've explored more into outer space than our own ocean, so that itself is pretty incredible. And just being able to use that, from a pharmaceutical perspective, we have so much potential. And some of our biggest medical advancements have come from the ocean, like the horseshoe crab blood, which is worth $14,000 per liter. And it was one of the biggest advancements in medical sterilization for IVs. So I'll lead to that. I basically
Horseshoe
did research
crab
for
blood.
3 years. Yep. It's blue blood that has been used for years and completely revolutionized sterilization within the medical field.
Vaccines too, I thought, right? Like it contains not an antibiotic. I'm blanking on the word, but it's like in a lot of vaccines as well. Yeah.
So basically, it helped completely revolutionize sterilization and completely
Wow.
moved big medical advances forward. And there's lots of other derivatives from the ocean, but that's one of the biggest breakthroughs. So it's just showing an example of how we can really utilize also marine organisms for various other applications. But
Okay.
I
So
essentially got down the road of I was doing research. I worked in a cancer lab connected to Shands in Gainesville that had no windows. And I really loved the research and the science, but I realized I didn't like being in the lab all the time. And I also realized, well, these corals are dying, so we can't really use them if they're not there. And in my short lifetime of diving, I saw huge coral colonies the size of a 6-foot diameter table die in 3 days and off the
Whoa.
coast of people's houses. And they had no idea nor maybe cared about it. So, kind of becoming a voice for the voiceless in a sense, really, that was my call to action in a sense of we need to protect these ecosystems and help safeguard their protection and restoration. And more than restoration, we need to be looking at regeneration and actually making sure that the systems sustain and we're not just replacing them. So that's how I got into doing restoration, and I had an applied restoration background. And then moving forward to get into artificial reefs was a completely different pathway to lead me to where I am now.
So there, man. Okay. First of all, can I refer to you as the Lorax of the reefs? Is that appropriate? You speak for the
Whatever
reefs.
you'd like to do.
I mean, it's fitting.
It is. It's fitting. But so basically what you're telling me here, okay, so a lot of those benefits that you talked about are, they're not, I don't know if you want to call them active or passive, but through our research, there's a lot of possible benefits there, and already benefits that we've discovered and huge advancements from the ocean and from these reefs and the corals, et cetera. And like you said, we've explored more of outer space than we have of the ocean floor and our oceans. But so what are the kind of, I guess, not passive, but what are the other losses that we're losing that without our research, the reefs in the ocean provide us with so much. We can't let them die. It's not just because we can't get the blood of horseshoe crabs.
Yeah. No.
What else does it do? What else does it do for us except to draw us down to look at Nemo and Dory?
Gotcha. Yeah, they have immense value ecologically for what we call ecosystem services. First of all, a majority of all of the food fish you eat from the marine environment spend some point of their lifetime in a nursery, and a lot of that's reef ecosystems that help to really feed the world. They also are coastal protection, and our marine ecosystems actually provide more oxygen than our terrestrial plants. So ocean health is critical. And people don't realize the reason why we live on Earth and are enabled to is because of our oceans. It drives all of our weather patterns, and without it, we would not be able to live on Earth. And so their health and maintenance of these ecosystems is critical, and it's really not taught into education on how fundamental that is into even our weather patterns. And again, just the biodiversity of these ecosystems are also just so evolved. We're not even really understanding to the full extent of what kind of impacts that would have if we lose them. So it impacts our food, it impacts our oxygen, it impacts also potential ailments and cures and coastal protection. So without them, we're risking losing so much.
But also, Michael, like the other thing too, and I think that Shelby touched on this briefly, but like something that I think is of interest to a lot of people too, it's like the tourism factor, like what you said before, Shelby, about like they're trying to build the beaches so there's more tourists, but in doing so, like they're taking like they're covering up the Band-Aid, but it's also the tourist factor of getting divers and getting like surfers, like with the wave breaks, and getting these people to your area has immense value as well. Like just from a purely not even ecological standpoint, but just like as a community, something that someone might directly care about, like that's immensely valuable as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, so they also have the economic value, right? And that is tourism. There's a lot of reasons why people want to live in Florida because of these beautiful ecosystems. You find that's why people want to travel to these tropical regions. I mean, they have that value because of the ecosystem that's present and the experiences that you have within them. So they have a price tag that's worth billions of dollars. And that's just an aside from the environmental and ecosystem importance that they have.
Yeah. So Emma, we got to introduce Rosie Sherwood to Shelby.
No, I was just thinking that. So Rosie Sherwood was someone we had on the pod, and she's an artist that works in the UK, and she does a lot of work with like seagrass beds and the role that seagrass beds play on like oxygen production and habitat, and pretty much the same that you're talking about. Just same sort of idea where it's art, but it's also functional, but it's also raising awareness of these ideas. And I think that the cool thing about your projects, at least one of the things that you're doing, is the Thousand Mermaids project, which is art, but it is functional. Do you want to talk about that like a little bit more?
Yeah. So I'll start, I guess, first by getting in how I got involved with this project. I initially got involved with the 1,000 Mermaids project first, and that's what made me fall in love with using art. So essentially, the 1,000 Mermaids project started by two artists, and they had initially, they were doing body casting of real people and doing physique and kind of Romanesque structures with no head and no full lower body. It's all physique. And they had a client that wanted his wife sculpted as a mermaid to put at the end of his dock by his yacht in Miami Beach. And it took them months to build this lifelike statue of his wife. They come back to him with this concrete mermaid. And the guy's like, well, I got some bad news. Lost my house, lost my wife, and I'm going to prison. Lost everything.
No. Oh, God.
So one of those Miami scammers.
Yeah, I got you.
But here they are with this concrete sculpture. They're like, well, what do we do with it? And he's like, well, just throw it in the effing ocean. And they're like, well, can we do that? And that's what got them into thinking about artificial reefs. They got connected with our reef builder. Then they started wanting to put mermaids on rocks. And eventually they're like, well, can we put corals on these structures? And I'm a coral biologist, so a lot of people in the South Florida community are familiar with me and some of my work. And they reached out to me seeing if they could put corals on these. I said, well, you're not going to be able to do that, but this is interesting. And, well, if we design these to be more specifically biologically beneficial, we could put corals on them. And there's lots of regulations that have really, we've gotten some of the first permits, period, to be able to do this. And that's really been helpful of having the scientific background of understanding, what those constraints are. But that's where this all kind of got merged. And so then went on to start Ocean Rescue Alliance and dive further deeper into the application and design fundamentals of artificial reefs, and then refining art initiatives. But the 1,000 Mermaids project was really more to create that story narrative of using the mermaid, the half human, half fish, personal connection, right? It's almost in every culture. There's this mysterious mermaid, right? It's in a lot of cultures, that's folklore and sailor stories, and there's a lot of people that know about it. So they wanted to use this kind of mysterious figure as a way to bring awareness to the problems plaguing our oceans. And so that's where the whole mermaid narrative came from. Unique story coming out. And I really fell in love with using art as a way to incentivize funding restoration at scale and also creating that personal connection. Not everyone cares about corals. Not everyone cares about oysters or seagrass, or not these charismatic species is what we call them, is very needed restoration that is not sexy science, right? And so using art's a way to actually bring in more people and get them on board and bring awareness in a creative way. And so what we do now is really do in-depth art projects that can connect to community and culture. And so a good example of a project I'm super passionate about is we're fundraising for a Mayan reef in Mexico. And that's our first culturally relevant reef site. We're working with a Mayan community to do a serpent deity called the Kluklon.
Oh,
and
cool.
So that reef site, more importantly, will really help engage the local community and be a resource, because this is for them. This is for their future generations, and we want people to invest into protecting these coastal resources and not just exploiting them and diminishing them. So being able to bring awareness to Mayan culture and serve the local community is a really good way to do this through the art aspect, but also creating a coral nursery, protecting against coastal erosion, and creating a unique dive site that can engage people from all around the world. And it just provides unique ways to tie in and also create a corporate responsibility. You see all these hotels, all these coastal developers on the beach line that get to benefit from it every day, but they're not paying into restoration. They're not becoming part of the solution. And sometimes they're not incentivized to. In Florida and in the US, taxpayers pay for the needed work, for the beach nourishment, for coastal mitigation, but those hotels do not. And so being able to do an artistic reef that's crafted to that hotel is another way to incentivize them to become part of the solution that's very customizable to them.
Yeah. So Shelby, so when you talk about that, the taxpayers are doing it, and the hotels aren't, right. It, should they be? It would seem to me like they should. You know, we're getting into legislation now, obviously, of EPR, extended producers responsibility
Hmm.
legislation around. And if you're bringing in tourists and are part of the problem that is destroying some of these reefs, should you not be responsible for helping to restore some of these? I mean, they're
I
obviously
mean,
very, very
absolutely.
important assets.
They should be, but it's a matter of fact. We know legislature moves slow. So we don't
Yeah,
have time to we
sure.
don't have time to wait around for
No, we
let's
certainly don't.
pass this in 10, 15 years and then keep pressing whose responsibility is it? Whose problem is it? We're all pointing fingers. And
Yeah.
we just need to create accountability and create this corporate responsibility as well for the people that are engaged in exploiting these resources daily. And that's where, I guess I call it, it's not subtle manipulation, but it's a creative way to engage people that are currently not
No,
engaged.
no, it's perfect. It makes a ton of sense because, like you say, there's certain things that are just not sexy enough to get people interested in it and stay involved inside it. And you're looking for that way to do it. And I think it's perfect. The Mayan Reef and so forth is beautiful. I love it. I like the mermaid, and you can have many others. How? Let me ask you this: what is actually killing the reefs? Is it divers? Is it people throwing anchors into the reefs? Is it storms? And even if it is storms, is it caused by us because of global warming, or has it been going on forever? And how do these structures actually protect those and aren't just a band-aid? That's a
It's
big
a good
question.
question. So it's really all of the above, but every single area has different stressors. So specific to the Florida Reef, we mainly have disease issues that are wiping out what we call stony corals, which are that reef building coral that actually creates the structure, the
Yeah,
skeletal
gotcha.
framework of that reef. So we have it's essentially almost like leprosy for corals. They have this disease that makes the tissue melt off, makes the coral turn white and die off, and it's happening at an expedited rate.
Is that
And
called
this
bleaching? Is that what you call bleaching?
Bleaching is a sign of distress and a dying coral, but that doesn't tell you why it's dying.
Okay, so that's
White
just a symptom.
white just
Bleaching is a
means
symptom.
exactly
Gotcha.
that is a dying coral, but that doesn't tell you what the cause is. So in Florida, we have primarily disease, but also there's pollution. There's what we call ocean acidification, which is extra carbon in the atmosphere becomes carbonic acid that actually dissolves the corals and marine organisms over time. And that's impacting all of our reef systems. It's impacting a variety of other things in the ocean as well. But so we have all these what we call anthropogenic, which just means human influenced problems and causes in the ocean. Eutrophication, which is excess nutrients that are causing pollution, and there's lots of other impacts, but it's mostly human related. For all of these, there are natural cycles, just like you'd see, for example, red tide, that is natural, but not at the rate that it's happening. So we've really expedited everything.
Gotcha. So
Um,
the natural causes, we're actually exacerbating those issues. Are we exacerbating like those diseases, like you called, like the
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So, and I'll give you an example. I mean, people, especially because of COVID, have become a little bit more aware of bacteria and viruses that live around
yeah,
everything that you
yeah,
cannot see.
yeah.
And so when we're just on the topic of dredging, for example, for a port, this has not been conclusively linked, but when they dredge down and disturb miles and miles of sediment that's been settled for hundreds of years, you're disturbing bacteria and viruses that have been settled in that sediment for hundreds of years. You don't know what kind of effects that's going to have when you bring that into the water column now. And now in a marine environment, you're just playing management because you've already released it. It's not the same as on land on being able to take different adaptive management strategies. So the really, adverse impacts of doing these dredging projects is just now starting to be scientifically explored. I mean, it's even the different sediment grades being placed
Wow.
on beaches affects sea turtle sex ratios because they're temperature dependent. They're having more female sea turtles being born because they're bringing in sediments that have a higher temperature. And so that's just, two specific examples. I mean, for coral reefs, that sand goes out and chokes out the corals and they die and smother underneath the sand. We've lost a majority of the South Beach Miami reef due to dredging and doing beach renourishment. It used to have a beautiful reef system right off the beach. South Beach is all artificial. Um, So, I mean, we've done a lot of damage, and, so, going back to how our structures are not a band-aid, we can actually design structures that reduce that wave energy. So instead of doing beach nourishment, we could actually invest into coastal infrastructure that fundamentally create habitat, solve your problem, but also expand the range of where we can do restoration. That doesn't mean we can just stop disease. That doesn't mean we can just stop some of these pressures. But now what we can do is actually locate corals in an area that might not have disease. It might be in better conditions for growing. We still need to do restoration on these natural systems, but I'm a big advocate of doing basically mixed method approaches. So you can't put all your eggs in one basket and expect everything to work. And so we use even adaptive strategies for outplanting, where we'll work with groups who sexually reproduce corals. You get the benefit of having a biodiverse group of corals going out versus fragmenting, which is basically where, like, if you were propagating a plant, like a succulent, we'll just go with that. You can make a bunch of little plants from it. That's what we do with coral colonies. We trim off pieces, and then they grow at an expedited rate because of that fragmenting. And then
Oh,
they
really?
outplant those. Yeah. And then they outplant those. And so you can outplant a lot of corals at scale. But the problem is they're the same genetic clone. So if that one coral, and you put out 100 fragments of that one coral, was affected by disease, there goes all your efforts, right? So we're needing to make sure we're taking adaptive approaches to safeguard the species in the long run. And so that's where we're always making monitoring plans, and a lot of the adjustments also with restoration groups is they're looking at this too. They're working with coral genotypes and species that are more resilient, that they're genetically assessing like their success and how they deal with heat change, thermal tolerance, and how warming temperatures, and how they're dealing with stress and disease. And then they'll rank them and decide which corals they put out where based off of that system.
Well, the coolest thing too, it seems like about this whole project is that it really can be adaptable based on where you put them. I mean, if you have a place that, I mean, kind of like you said, like you can kind of change the structures and what you put on them and somewhat of the environment to adapt to these changes. And so, like, you're not just building a structure just for South Florida. You're also building a structure that can be used in other ecosystems and other places for different reasons and different purposes.
Correct. And like I said, that's not just coral. That's just what we do in South Florida. That's where we started. That's where my heart is because I come from coral restoration. But we can do other species, and the intent is to expand to other species. And we can also do, no biological species. Like in New York, we would not be putting anything off the coast of New York that's a coral or a mangrove, right? So
you can still use it to help in other ways.
Yes.
Are there not cold water corals? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying no. There are cold water corals,
Okay.
but you're not finding corals off the coast of New York.
So you're not going to put them in a place where you wouldn't naturally find them anyways, right? Is that what you're saying?
No, yeah, that we would not do that.
Okay, because that was part of my question.
Those corals will never grow in New York.
Well, so that was my question. If we're looking at places where corals are dying, right? Are you only focusing on those to rebuild those structures and help them, or can you actually build structures in other places and kind of relocate these to safer locations?
We do that.
Okay, so how does that work? Because over the millions and millions and millions and millions of years, corals have grown in these specific places. Why did they not grow in these places you're going to move them to?
Well, some of it takes a lot of time, right? So you basically look at adaptive evolution, and corals can make a transition to grow elsewhere, but at the expedited rate of the pressures, we are just eliminating sexual reproductive adults from being able to expand habitat ranges. So what we do, for example, in the case of Florida, the reefs extend all the way up to West Palm Beach. Some people might not even know that the natural reefs extend all the way up there, but there's structural limitation. There's not a lot of actual reef habitat that's existent there. So us creating an artificial reef there gives us a fundamental base that we can outplant coral on, and now we can create a thriving reef there. There are natural reef systems on the shelves. There's hard bottom habitat. The species diversity changes. We have hard, stony, branching corals in South Florida. It used to be historically present in West Palm and have these, what they call Acropora staghorn thickets. They're not present anymore, but that doesn't mean they can't exist there still. And so we're part of research, for example, with University of Miami is one of our biggest partners, and we've outplanted corals in West Palm Beach and Jupiter, which is that northern range. And we're actually taking tissue samples of these corals over the months to look at how their symbiotic relationships change and how that's this thermal stress of cooler water is affecting them, and can they thrive. And actually the corals have been growing great, and it's been an amazing study that really demonstrates their adaptability for outplanting them in these northern areas that are completely absent of the disease itself. We're really seeing where this disease has expanded from South Florida all the way down through the Caribbean. And it's called stony tissue loss disease. There's also black band disease. There's a variety, and I'm not going to get into the too sciencey stuff with that, but that's just showing where we can really now expand that habitat range and help save some of the species and at least preserve those genetics.
Wow. What are the different effects that we as humans what are the different things that we do that have these effects? What is it that we are doing that is exacerbating the problem of the diseases, for example, right? Is it carbon pollution? Is that what it is? Carbon emissions? Is it plastic in the ocean? Do we have anything specific to start?
So that's not relative to disease, but those still have impacts. Like microplastics have impacts. Of course, pollution has impacts. Really, disease has been linked to, like, that's a biological factor. Right. So really, that's what we're thinking from, like, dredging and different aspects of that can create. And also, like, invasives, right? We also have a very advanced transportation system around the globe. I mean, Florida is another really center of invasive species, both terrestrial and aquatic, where we're taking, ships that have ballast water that they'll dump from across the world. So we're bringing literally different micro environments and releasing them, and, not knowing what the consequence is. I mean, lionfish, I don't know if have heard of lionfish,
yes,
but that's one of the most invasive fish species that was introduced from the aquarium trade, and now they cannot get a handle on it. So that's just a good example of just, that's one species that's taken off, and now we're just playing management for the rest of our life with it, and Florida's kind of the center of a lot of that, similar stories. And so just think on the microbiological level, that's even harder to track than a lionfish.
No, it really is. And so with the expansion of the Panama Canal, right? I've been in logistics for 34 years. And with the expansion of the Panama Canal, you're starting to have larger and more ships coming through the Panama Canal to the East Coast. And then with, during the pandemic, the change in buying and the massive surge of e-commerce, et cetera, and the backlog of ships in San Pedro off of, in South California, moving all those ships and all those goods into Savannah and Jacksonville and in Houston and Elizabeth, EWR, and hence all of the new dredging and widening of those canals, et cetera, brings all those ballast waters and other things into the system. And I would suspect that we're probably going to see an increase in even the negative effects we see right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we really, all of these factors, expanding shipping canals and extra tourism, and, these all have direct impacts on our marine ecosystems, just like dredging for beach nourishment. They may not be immediately seen, but it has an impact over time. And it's hard to directly link them, right? And so that's why it becomes even harder from a regulatory standpoint to hold people accountable. And so that's where for us, I think the biggest thing, we typically are just really reactive as a human species. Like, we live in the state of abundance. We're not worried about problem till it's there. We can't wait for our reefs to die to wonder where our fish are going to go. And we really aim to use artificial reefs to be proactive and creating fundamental habitat that we can expand, again, restoration ranges. So in my mind, that's the best thing that we can do in terms of having these adaptive solutions that can still, meet the needs of what we need in society, but helping the environment at the same time.
Wow. It's so let me ask you this before we get into, like, how people get involved and some of the other things there that are really cool, that I just have some interest in the artistic side of this thing. Is there a list of things that happen as the coral starts to die that we should be looking at to gauge how far down the depths we're going? I mean, is it we start to lose fish species, et cetera, and then we start to see? I mean, they clean the oceans as well, do they not?
The corals?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. So, I mean, in terms of nutrients, they do sequester some nutrients, but like, for example, oysters are a good example of a natural filtration. They
Right.
can filter
Okay.
excess nutrients, as well as, I mean, they can even bioaccumulate negative things. So, I mean, we have all these, they call them PFAS. They're basically like these higher chemicals that bioaccumulate that are not good for our bodies. And there's certain times of years too, like even when there's big algal blooms that, you're not recommended to eat oysters or certain things in different areas. So corals do not filter like an oyster does, but like I said, everything has a function in the marine ecosystem. So all these pressures, the same thing that's affecting corals, impacts these other ecosystems as well. But in terms of being able to monitor and look at, again, like corals turn white depending on the coral species, out of stress, and that's a sign. Okay, that's not good. Something's wrong here. And so for us, that's from a monitoring perspective, when you're seeing these white corals or tissue recession, or some of the other species that are just, you can see symptoms of them dying, that shows that there's a problem there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not something that's a gradual thing. It can be very drastic. You could have look like a perfectly healthy coral, and then the next day it be completely white and gone.
Wow.
It can happen
Exactly.
really fast. So it's
Wow.
not like this slow, we have some time to fix this.
So
um,
it sounds like it's difficult to pin down exactly what the biggest threat is. Is that a fair statement?
I would say it's contingent on the geographic region that you're talking about. So we have different pressures versus the Great Barrier Reef. Some of them are the same, but we have more of an issue with disease, where Great Barrier Reef has more of an issue with temperature. But we still have some of those same problems, but to the extent of those pressures are different. I mean, just like how if you lived in New York versus Florida, you're going to have more hurricanes. You live in a different area that has different substantial pressures and just different ecosystem dynamics that will factor in there.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, what's your favorite artistic reef so far that you guys done?
I would say we haven't done it yet, but that Mayan one I'm really excited about. But another fun one, we have an underwater selfie tail, so you can dive and become a mermaid
I
underwater.
saw that one. I saw that one on your. I was looking at that on your website. That one's very cool. That was very cool.
Yeah,
In St. John, what is it? A cruise bay or where they have the underwater the
underwater art museum.
well, it's
I'm
a
not.
it's a national park, right? It's an underwater national park, and they have a trail that you can snorkel through in St.
Oh
John.
yes,
You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
they do.
Is that something you guys would do something like that as
We're
well?
we're aiming to, actually. We just deployed a reef on November 1st with the city of Hollywood. That site was 40 feet of depth, but we are doing a nearshore snorkel reef next year, and so that will be 15 to 20 feet, and that will be a lot more publicly accessible, which is also what we're wanting to do with these sites, is make them more available for people to experience marine resources, and also have a benefit, right, for coastal protection, but also actually engaging people. So
Is
we're
there
aiming to do snorkel reefs in the future. Just
what
takes a
is
while to permit.
is there a prize reef or project out there that you can't wait to do, and someday you'll get to do it? That is kind of that goal. You're going, yeah. I mean, other than completely saving all the reefs, which obviously we hope you're successful doing that.
Yeah.
Is it, like you
Um,
know what I'm saying? Like for me,
yeah,
I
I know
think I
what you're
would
saying.
probably want to do like a life size model of Bikini Bottom from SpongeBob
Yeah.
SquarePants. Would be
Well,
cool.
that's the fun thing, right? We can get really creative with the art and do a variety of different initiatives. I'd say, for me, I want to continue doing more deeply connected art impacts, so we can actually tailor it to be the most impactful to community and engaging people and bringing awareness. I'll just give a context too for that Hollywood site. There's a hard rock hotel that's the shape of a guitar.
Oh, very
And
cool.
so one thing we'd like to do is actually, approach them and say, hey, we can do a guitar shaped reef. So if you flew over the ocean, it would look like a guitar. But when you dive the site, we'd make each sculpture a different musician. So it can really
Oh,
tailor
yeah.
to that brand. But more importantly, it gets a restoration site created. And even if the Hard Rock cared nothing about coral, cared nothing about marine conservation, they might be incentivized because the PR, the tax write-off, the
You could,
site that
yeah.
people
It
can
appeals
dive
to
at
their
now.
interests.
Well, you could get
And
you
so,
could get like hard rock and Gibson guitars together and put
yeah,
something together, and
well,
you got
that's an example.
a lot of aging rockers that are looking to do something with their money, right? I mean,
Well, I
look
mean,
at,
that's just an example of how we can go any which way.
yeah,
And so I think the thing that I'm most excited about in terms of what you said, like what's the large impactful idea. I mean, I really desire to do this in developing countries that need these resources a lot more than we do in Florida.
sure,
So that's
sure,
more of my dream, is to build that out in other areas, and again, be more culturally impactful to that area to serve that community. But I think, I mean, really the opportunities are endless. And for me, the more people that I can engage that have nothing to do with the ocean, the better, because that's who we need to engage.
yeah,
And
absolutely,
that's why we use the art. I think we're already, typically as scientists and ocean advocates, you're preaching to the choir of people who are somewhat already interested. So using art, we can actually engage people that have nothing to do with the ocean, and they need to care about it.
sure.
So that's
I
the
love
thought.
the advertising aspect, right? I mean, better than, I mean, what's better than like shooting your logo up onto the moon during a full moon than just having your own reef for people,
Right.
especially, I mean, and I mean, you talk about high price real estate. I mean,
Hmm.
they move a lot of planes from San Juan into Miami airport that are, I mean, they
Right.
fly over the same route, right? It's not
Exactly.
like it's random. So,
Yeah.
pay the pilot a couple $100 to say, out your right hand window, you can see the Hard Rock Reef put together by Shelby Thomas. Um,
But then on the flip side too, like that's so cool because then it's even if you don't care about reefs, as the Hard Rock, you can say, "Hey, we care about the environment. Look what we're doing." And you
yeah,
just
of
keep
course.
looking at it from even that other perspective. Like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
no downside.
let's eliminate the greenwashing and actually create impact is my thought. There's lots of people, I'm not gonna point fingers, but they're like Coca-Cola, right? Like they're I just saw an article, they're sponsoring something with the COP, the United Nations Climate Conference, and some people are like outraged about this. They're like, well, what is Coca-Cola doing now? And it's hard. Like, I mean, I think it's hard to also look at and point fingers at some of these corporations, right? They're like upset about the plastic and Coca-Cola being in the ocean, right? But obviously, that's part of the consumer problem. That's part of the story. That's part of the narrative. Like, you need to shift society's relationship and make them, make people have more respect for their ecosystems. It's not just, I'm not saying, okay, yes, these companies should take a more sustainable approach. They should look into, alternative products that biodegrade. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, if you don't change how people interact with the environment and how they care about it, you're going to still have these problems.
Amen.
And so that's where we hope to again use the art as a way to make it personal. Now people can also create their own reef.
Okay, so with that, how does somebody like myself who's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, nowhere near a beach,
Hmm.
how do I help you guys? How do I get involved? How do I do something that to get involved? I care about
Yeah.
care about it.
Yeah. So we have lots of ways. Of course, you can donate or sponsor, create your own reef module, adopt a coral. We have a variety of different programs that can engage people from adopting a coral at $20 to creating your own reef from $3,000 to $10,000, depending on if you're doing a custom art piece. So you can create a very tangible, impactful project just on your own. You can rally a group together, even just spreading the message, or we even have volunteer opportunities virtually. If you're a marketing guy, if you're a, it's we work with a lot of variety of people. We're also doing virtual and augmented reality, so using tech very impactfully to engage people that are in the middle of the U.S. like yourself, and let you have an experience of maybe you physically couldn't dive, right? We want you to be able to experience that and have a different relationship with the environment. So that's just another example. Like, we even work with people in the tech industry. And so I would really encourage, if people are interested in volunteering or, again, donating or creating your own structure, we have that capacity to do so.
Very cool. And they just go to your website to do that.
Yeah. Yep. So you can find us at oceanrescuealliance.org. You can also email me. It's just Shelby at oceanrescuealliance.org. We also have a site specifically for our eco art project. That's 1000mermaids.com. But we have all of the other art initiatives underneath the Ocean Rescue Alliance website.
Very cool. Very cool. Wow. Well, hey, this was really cool. The last question that I have really is just what they're made out of. You said a pH balance, like cement, right? Are you guys looking at other ways to like sequester trash or anything, or is that just not possible or too dangerous?
Not necessarily trash. So we don't put any plastics or anything like that into our mixes. We use an environmentally friendly concrete, but we are looking at other solutions. So we actually just started working with another company that's called Carbon Sync, and they have a crystal that essentially sequesters carbon. And so one of our future initiatives, we're looking into research now with being able to integrate this material so we can actually create a carbon sink with the artificial reefs that can sequester and stabilize carbon in the ocean. And
that's
of course,
very
cool.
Yeah. So I think we're at a really, and this is just like I'm a big advocate of, we can solve some of the world's biggest problems. It's just putting the right people at the table and technology to do it. We're in the most advanced state technologically that we can do a lot. I mean, goodness,
it's exciting.
Literally getting samples and data from Mars, but we're not making efficient, clean energy out of our oceans. We're not, restoring our resources here. It just shows, we can do it. It's just putting that focus on it. So
but it's kind of an exciting time, right? To be able to partner and do all these things and get
exactly.
More. Yeah.
So I think, we're going to continue to innovate, and that's really our goal. And again, trying to refine these materials. And so I'm looking forward to that. We don't have that fully refined yet in terms of the carbon sink material, but that's our next steps, as well as even merging into ocean energy.
Wow.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Is there one thing that you've learned or know of that you just wish everybody else who didn't know what you were doing did know? I mean, you're working.
I would say just that just the fact that every individual has an impact. I mean, people think that they're too small to have an impact on the ocean, and that it's just a big blanket of water, and that's not true whatsoever. And so what our goal with doing these different programs is every individual can have a direct impact. And we want to enable that, even from like the smallest donation of adopting a coral for $20. I mean, that's a great way. People adopt a star in the sky, they name a star. So why not actually protect a living resource? So we have a variety of different ways to engage. That you can see that on the website. And I would just say, that's the biggest thing. You're not too small to make an impact, or, everyone can make a difference. And whether you want to start small and do, of course, reduce, reuse, recycle, but looking at becoming an eco-conscious consumer, be aware of where your products are coming from, be aware of who you're supporting, and just, become educated on how you can help, even if you can help locally, like doing cleanups. If that's all you can do, and do something immediately in your environment and community, do it,
Excellent stuff. I appreciate it very much. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Shelby. We're going to have you on again, or get some updates onto where you guys are at. Where are you at on 1,000 mermaids? Is that the goal, or you're going to go past 1,000 mermaids? If you get 1,000, you're going to go to 2,000, right?
Yeah. Our goal would be to get over it and all over the world, right? So it's not just one site, but right now we're at 35 sculptures. So we still got a while to go.
So you're pretty young. Okay. So you're pretty young in it.
Though. I mean, 35 is no small number.
It's a start, but we have 180 structures in the ocean. The rest of those are really for habitat and restoration. But in terms of mermaid sculptures, we're at 35.
Nice.
Gotcha. Very cool. Hey, we're the Sustainiacs. Just hit us up at the sustainiacs@gmail.com, or look me up, or search the Sustainiacs anywhere. Look me up at Michael Vincent on LinkedIn. Emma, where are they finding you at?
Emma_Sustainiacs on Insta, and I tag the Sustainiacs account too. So I don't know why I have my own, but I do, and we're rolling with it. So anywhere you want to contact us, please give us a shout. If you have any questions for Shelby, we can have her back on and ask some of your questions. Definitely let us know if you have any thoughts about the episode or ORA or anything like that.
Yeah, and again, your website again, Shelby, is
oceanrescuealliance.org.
Gotcha.
And we
Or you
also
can
have
reach
our Instagram, Ocean Rescue Alliance, and then the number is 1,000 Mermaids. There's two. So
yeah.
check us
Yeah.
out.
Very
Facebook,
cool.
Instagram,
Hit them
all
up.
that.
They're doing awesome stuff. Get those 1,000 mermaids. We expect those done by Christmas. Thank you very much.
Put the pressure
Peace
on.
and love,
Yeah.
everybody.